Welcome to The Individual Animal, a podcast about dogs, people, and animal sheltering. I'm your host, Nikki, here with my co-host, Bernice. How you doing, Bernice?
I'm doing great, Nikki. How you doing?
Good. Hot?
Hot, yeah. Listen, I love the hot, though, so I'm not going to complain.
It has been really nice.
Yes.
Nice and warm. So we had Lisa Gunter on. That was I loved this episode. I kind of fangirled out a little bit on this episode because a lot of the stuff that she's put out there I use often. So all the work that she's done has been really helpful to me. So I was excited to talk to her. And she has a really cool job.
She has a pretty awesome job. She's also one of the people, when I think about who's done a lot for shelter dogs, she's always at the top of my list.
Yeah.
And I think everybody should look at her stuff.
Yes. We'll put a link to all of the things that she's done in the show notes. Currently, she's the assistant professor at Virginia Tech, the School of Animal Science. And then she also directs the Laboratory of Animal Behavior and Welfare there. Her research explores animal behavior and the welfare of companion animals, specifically our interactions with them, and as it relates to animal sheltering, behavioral issues, and training. So I think all of the animal sheltering folks listening are really going to enjoy this episode.
I think so too.
She has a PhD, an MA, and then a CBCCKA, which I had to look up. The CBCCKA. A lot of you probably are like, really, Nikki? But I didn't realize that there was a difference between that and the CPDT.
Yeah, they're completely different.
Yeah. Do you want to explain the difference, or do you think most people are going to know?
Well, yeah, so CPDT is trainers, and the other is behavior.
Yeah. It's like
so training and behavior are different. Like some people do both, but you know.
So you can be one or the other. There's not like there could not be an overlap.
Oh, there's a huge overlap, right? Because if you can do behavior work, you can do training work. But as a dog trainer, you're not necessarily qualified to do actual behavior stuff.
Okay.
All of the time.
And then there's
many are
veterinary behaviors, which is a totally separate thing, right? So it's a whole bunch of different options.
Like, why are all these titles? Really, I think they should break it up even more, but
I know we were talking about that the other day. I don't know if that's the specific thing that you were talking about, but just trainers, and then the trainers that work in animal sheltering, which is like a whole different thing, right?
It's a whole different thing. It's a tough job. It's a completely different thing when you're working with a person who owns the dog, right? Because you're basically working with the person, showing them what to do with their dog. The dog, in theory, has a connection with their person, makes things a little bit smoother and easier. We're in a shelter, the dogs don't necessarily have a person or an attachment, and you got to figure it out.
Yeah, and you're not training the person to do the things, you're training the dog to be able to do the things when the person takes over, right?
Yes. So. Under duress sometimes for the dog.
And you're not thinking about specific things that you would with like a own dog. You're thinking about like, I don't want the dog to jump on this specific thing, or, in a home where you have to think as a trainer working in animal welfare and sheltering. I mean, you have to think about like, what are the things that adopters are going to want this dog like to behave, like not simple things, but right.
Yeah, well, I mean, and a lot of times in the shelter, it's just what can I do with this poor dog in this moment in time to work their brain and make it easier for them to transition into a home.
Mm-hmm. So that was a bit of a tangent, but
yeah, sorry about that.
Enjoy the episode. We had a great time, and we've convinced Lisa to come back, so she'll be back on.
Yep. So if you got questions, ask away so we can get the right answers for you.
Absolutely. All right. Enjoy. So thank you so much. We were very excited about this. And then in participation, like doing all of this research on, I know some of your work, but then like diving deep, doing some more research on what you do, I was like, oh my God, I feel like we have so much to talk about. So I might I might ask you to come on again.
Yeah, I was gonna say we can't do all of it in one, so
I don't want to overwhelm everybody, but it's pretty cool all the things that you've accomplished. And I think that
lucky shelter dogs.
yeah, yeah. And like perfect audience, I think, for what we're going to be talking about today. So that's really cool. So why don't you just start by introducing yourself to the listeners and tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started doing a lot of like animal welfare type research and programs.
Sure. So I'm Dr. Lisa Gunter. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Animal Sciences at Virginia Tech. So that's where I am now, how I got there. After my bachelor's degree, which is in something totally different, it's in music journalism.
That's awesome.
Something totally different. I was living in California and decided to volunteer at my local animal shelter. They had this program called Second Chance, where you could take dogs that were in the shelter, or that were up for adoption or soon to be up for adoption. You could take them to a training class, and so that's like sort of where. I don't know where my interest came from. I grew up on a farm. I had always been around animals, but I think growing up, I had perceived that the way you have a career with animals is to be a veterinarian. And I am so squeamish at the sight of blood. I have a very sensitive stomach. So I knew that probably wasn't going to be the case for me. And so I think I pursued other things when I was younger and into high school and college. But it was really kind of coming to the animal shelter and realizing you would kind of help in this other way. And I became pretty interested in behavior. So I volunteered there. And then I had a career in animal sheltering that lasted for several years across different shelters, where I worked in behavior departments or managed dog programs. And so that's really, I think, really, when you probably take a look at my research, it's really informed by that like lived experience of being in sheltering and kind of trying to understand how that system works, or when there's this question and you don't really understand how does this work or why does this happen. That's probably, there's probably something about my experience that led me to like a fascination or curiosity about that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no. So I think one of the reasons I sort of like to sort of share sort of my educational journey is because I'm a first generation student. And so going to college or grad was new, but then an advanced degree, like what the heck is that? I didn't have any sort of representation of what that looked like. And so I think initially when I started my PhD, I had assumed that I would go into some sort of nonprofit work and didn't even imagine I would be in academia, not thinking that I was smart enough, not thinking that, that was a place that people like me could be. And so I'm really grateful to my mentor for sort of, poking that belief and saying like, why do you think that? And so that's led me to, I did a postdoc after my PhD. I was on faculty at Coastal Carolina University in South Carolina, and then I joined Virginia Tech back in July of last year.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And have done so much work and research throughout your career. My favorite research of you as of right now that you've done is the What's in a Name study that you did. It's been extremely helpful for me when I'm talking to shelters about removing breed labels and seeing dogs as individuals, to be like, hey, but there's also information that shows that this works.
Yeah.
And to be able to say that, like, dogs that were perceived as American Pit Bull Terriers, adoptions went up 3 times, or their length of stay went up 3 times less. Like, Now I'm forgetting the actual.
It's okay. It's okay. You don't have to remember all of the numbers. It's okay. I had to look back on it. I was like, wow, they're interested in this paper. I never like what did we do? Like it was actually really great. Like I thought like that's always a good one when you're like, yeah, let's learn about this together.
Well, it's such a comprehensive study. It's with like 4 studies in one, really, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's packed full of really insightful information. Can you talk a little bit about what you did for that study?
Sure. So I think the sort of like start of that study or the sort of impetus for that, it was actually, I started that work before I was even in grad school. And, like I said, I sort of had this untraditional path and I studied this one thing and then I decided to get an advanced degree in something else, which meant I had to take a lot of classes. When I applied to grad school, actually, my one transcripts from Evergreen, which was no grade, like got like lost because they didn't expect there would be these like written evaluations of like what a, like my student, my studentness. But I had like 7 different transcripts because I was taking classes everywhere, trying to like kind of fill in those gaps of knowledge that I had. And so that first study, just looking at the perceptions of the dogs in photographs, was out of a I think research methods or stats class. I forget which one. And I think research methods. And so that really, again, kind of came about through this, having worked in sheltering and found that people like perceived the dogs differently. And I was really inspired by a study by Anne Walsh, and she had shown folks photographs. And I think in that study, she used German Shepherds as sort of like these exemplar photos and looked at handlers. One thing that like I think often sort of gets sort of forgotten in that paper is that in that first study, we looked at how people perceived the dogs in photographs. And I always think that like we don't appreciate, like we just take a step back. These folks have never interacted with these dogs. It is just one photograph and they have all these ideas about their behavior. Like that to me has always surprised me. Like I know people are like, have ideas about breeds, but to look at a photograph and be like, I can tell from a photograph how trainable you are. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I don't know. Or how, I don't know. That's like to me just always sort of shocks me. But the other part of that first study was that we looked at what happened when we put a handler with the dog. So we set up these photo sessions with a friend of mine in San Francisco that's a wonderful photographer. And so she took photos of the dogs and then we placed them with other folks that were friends and colleagues. And I think that that is like one little bit of that paper that I think often isn't talked about, but I think so relevant to sheltering because we're often showing photos of dogs, sometimes dogs that have negative breed stereotypes, and they're having to kind of fight that stereotype on their own. I've always kind of thought about that in that way. And if the dog can live with kids or the dog is appropriate to live with someone that's older or other sort of individuals that have positive agency that can help the dog sort of deflect some of those breed assumptions that, those negative breed assumptions, I think we really need to be taking advantage of that. That it's hard for them to, I don't know, sit alone in that photo and do that work all by themselves. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway that I've never even thought about that angle of the study before, to be able to say, like, when we're talking about marketing the dogs in our shelters, like, hey, what you have in the photo with the dog is going to, I mean, we talk about this in marketing anyway, but to have this part of the study and think about it in that way is really great, to say like, hey, also in this, that's in a name study, they found, that the perceptions are different when different people are near dogs or things are near dogs, kids and whatnot. So yeah, I never thought about it like that. I don't know why, but yeah, it's awesome. So yeah, I loved that. So I just want to say thank you so much for doing all of that work. It's been super helpful, especially that you got a really large shelter to remove breed labels and see what happens.
Yeah, Yeah, that was sort of the really kind of cool process. And I think kind of going back to sort of how I was trained by my mentor and how it was important that like you have this idea and you take these iterations on the idea to really try to understand the facets of whatever phenomenon you're trying to understand. And so we looked at it first like in photographs, and then we're looking at the lived experience of the animals and like what is your length of stay, and like does it matter if you know what happens when you look like this other dog, but we're labeled something else. And then we're going to show photographs, or sorry, then we're going to show videos and do the same types of manipulations. It was sort of really this sort of approach. And then it was just timing. And I feel like life is so much about timing, and Orange County removed their breed labels, and we had read about it. I don't remember where we had read about it, but I thought we were like, my God, this is it. Like we could understand this in real life. And I just, you know, having worked with like so many shelters over my career, I immensely grateful when any shelter says like, yes, like we want to participate. It still like totally tickles me. Like that never gets old. Cause you know that this is like above and beyond what they do every day. And there's so many limited, you know, it's just an environment of such limited resources that they care enough about what you're interested in to help you carry it out. And so we were able to get a hold of their records and really take a look at this comparison the year. And we got records for several years beyond just what we had published. But I think, as you know, record keeping and sheltering, like, you know, even just looking from year to year, there's so much that happens. But we were really happy that they were willing to kind of play with us and help us answer this question. So.
Yeah.
That's
You've
awesome.
done a great job too creating these relationships with shelters to help you throughout the years, right? I mean, you have all of these foster, like, let's like jump into the foster related research
Sure.
that you've done.
Selfishly.
But even with that, can you talk a little bit about the previous research you've done around fostering and outings and sleepovers? I went to a great presentation of yours at Virginia Fed. That was really great that we got to talk about it. So that
Sure.
I'm excited to hear more. But yeah, if you can just go into a little bit about your previous research in fostering.
Sure. Again, sort of, I think we've all experienced this, that, you know, you have this, you know, question or this opportunity comes up and it like kind of completely changes the direction of your life. Sort of what happened when Erica Fierbacher and I, she had this great idea. She's like, let's go to Best Friends, and we were joking that we were like, you know, we're going to take the summer and like, you know, study abroad in Utah because it's like so gorgeous there and so different than where we were living. And you know, this is like, you know, I feel like academic humor, like let's go 2 states away. But anyway, so the whole idea was like, let's go to this place we've never been. And we just thought it was so cool. We had never been to the sanctuary before. And at the time, Sherry Woodard was working there, and she was she's a friend of ours, and she was like, yeah, come on down. I'm sure we'll find something that you guys, you know, that y'all can study. And so we're like, yep, sign us up. So we head down, and you know, we talked to folks about, you know, their different programs. It was, you know, again, we didn't come in with like an agenda. I think that's like probably something that I think we really try to hold true to whenever we can, and is like, if we go into this environment, like, well, what like resonates with you? Like, what are questions you have? I mean, that's where I think we try to inform our research. And so when we went there, there were, of course, they do all these wonderful programs, and one of them was this overnight program that they had for like 20 years, and they were just doing it.
I participated in that.
Yeah, right? Because it's like they have those really cool, I know, and they have these like really cool houses you can stay in. Like
I did it before the houses. So I stayed in a hotel with my dog.
Right. And also too, like they also like essentially own Kanab. So it is so pet friendly there. It's amazing. It's like how like everywhere should be, you know? So you can go anywhere with your dog. Doesn't matter the breed, you know? And so this whole sleepover program, I think folks had different ideas about it, right? Some folks that were in the behavior department or doing behavior stuff, they were like, this is great. It's kind of, it's a way we can learn more about the dogs in this different environment that's more home-like, right? That's what behavior folks are going to say, like context, context, context. And then there were, other folks, adoption folks, but other folks as well that were worried that they're like, hey, this is just one night, the dog goes and then they come back, and like, what if they think they're being returned, or like, what if that's traumatic for them? And I think that, this experience, I think, is just so sort of such a little example of the power of science in this way that, like, when we have a question and we can have differing opinions, the way we can kind of resolve this difference of opinion is through evidence and really trying to understand the system that we have this question about. And so that's what we sort of set out to do, is just, let's see how this program that y'all have been doing for such a long time, how does it actually reduce the dog's stress, and that was really the question, because that's where this sort of the difference of opinion lies. So it was from that initial one study at Best Friends that then we worked with like 4 other shelters. And then it was at the end of my PhD that we were awarded this large grant from Maddie's fund to help shelters implement sleepover programs, field trip programs, and long-term fostering programs. And through that, our goal was to help the launch of 100 different programs across the country, which my postdoc was about 4 years, including the pandemic. But we were able to launch about 40 field trip programs across the country, and then about 20 sleepovers before the pandemic. And then during the pandemic, we were able to pivot and do a study about fostering during the pandemic, which was really interesting. And then it was through that sort of, experience of the pandemic and really connecting with our shelters and listening to what they were experiencing that our interest had grown over those like 2.5 years in safety net fostering, or the fostering of owned dogs when their owners are experiencing hardship. And so that was sort of the end of that project. We were able to help, I think it was about 17 shelters launch safety net programs to keep people and their pets together.
Wow. And what were the actual results?
Okay, yeah, sure, I can talk about that. I know it's like an implementation grant, so I'm like, let me tell you about all the work that went in to get this data. So it was sort of interesting because in addition to helping the shelters launch these programs, we kind of had 2 arms of this project. One was let's help a lot of shelters implement these programs and try to understand at a programmatic level, how do they influence length of stay? How do they influence adoption? But we also wanted to stay on the track that we had started with sleepovers, like I mentioned that study we did with Best Friends and others, on the sort of physiological effects of, first we started with sleepovers, and then we looked at field trips. And when we published that paper on field trips, people weren't as excited about our findings as they were about sleepovers, right? Because sleepovers, we found that whether it was 1 or 2 nights, it reduced dog stress as measured by reduction in cortisol. We're seeing more rest. So everyone liked that. But then when we came out and said, field trips don't work the same way, it's actually probably stressful for the dogs to leave for just a couple of hours and come back and have to habituate back to that stressful environment. We were not such darlings anymore, but that's okay. And so, but we had left open in that paper that maybe there's something about field trips that it helps dogs, something about their like sort of distal welfare, like their long-term welfare. Somehow maybe that could help them. While it might not help them immediately, maybe there's these other effects that we have to measure. And so that was the nice thing then when we had this, huge data set of, between the field trip programs, like 40 of them, and like 20 sleepover programs. We had a lot of data of dogs that were going out into these programs and what effects it had on their length of stay, their adoption likelihood. And then we had all the dogs at those shelters that weren't participating. So they were our control group, essentially. And so we were able to amass like an over 20,000 sized control group with the about 2,500 dogs that participated. And that's where we found that that both of the programs benefited dogs' adoption likelihood. For dogs that went on field trips, they were about 5 times more likely to be adopted compared to dogs that didn't experience that program. And for dogs that went on sleepovers is about 14 times. Wow. So I think then, that really helps us sort of develop a more holistic appreciation of these programs and how they're working, both on that sort of immediate level for the animals. So if we're thinking about, hey, I need a stress reducing sort of intervention for this dog, it's not going to be sleepovers. It's probably going to be, not going to be field trips. It's probably going to be sleepovers, and that dog needs to kind of go to a house and rest and recharge. But if we're thinking about, increasing the likelihood of this dog being adopted, either of those programs, I think, work to do that. And while we don't really know the mechanisms of why that happens, why do these types of short-term fostering programs increase dogs' adoption success? Our guess, our best guess on it so far is that maybe it has something to do with like expanding the dog's social networks, that, more people know about these dogs, and, someone tells someone else, because most of the time, and this is what we always get asked, is most folks are like, well, but is it just the people that are doing these field trips and sleepovers adopting the dogs? They're not. With field trips, we found it was about 4% of the time, and with sleepovers, about 11% of the time. So it is really other folks that are hearing about these dogs and coming to the shelter and adopting them.
Was the marketing that was done for the dogs that were doing these sleepovers, do you know if it was usually like photos and videos from those foster families?
Yeah, I mean, it's
certainly
seeing
the dog living in a home.
Sure. Yeah. And that's something like we didn't control for, which I think could make a difference, right? We could see, that's certainly, I think, like a whole other study of what level of marketing we provide. Do we have photos? Do we have photos of this dog? Do we have videos of this dog? What do we know about like the dog's suitability with kids, with other dogs, with cats? Like, I think that's one thing, kind of circling back around to that, initial study that we did about removing breed labels, is that, I'm all for removing breed labels, but I think that we can't forget that breed label, whether we like it or not, confers information about the dog's behavior, whether or not it's correct, but there are assumptions about the dog's behavior that come with it. And I think if we are going to say, let's remove breed labels because we don't know what this dog is, 100% agreed. But then we also have to help people in like finding a pet that's suitable for their life and knowing more about how the dog is with other dogs or with people or with kiddos or the type of life they may have to lead. Again, we don't know based on the shelter whether or not that's going to hold true. And that's where I think, again, sort of trial adoption programs are sort of where it's at, because we can probably have some good guesses and maybe they'll pan out and sometimes they won't. But likely the best way to understand if a dog is a match for that home is to gather data about that dog in that home to try to understand if it's a good match. Mm-hmm. So
yes.
Yeah.
Did you notice a difference in individual dogs? Like some individual dogs would prefer outings over field trips or field trips over outings?
That's a great question. I know a lot of your questions are, that's really great. I don't know the answer.
That's okay.
but I do think though that like, it's important to sort of, and I always kind of stress this when I talk about these programs, because folks are like, well, what about like a dog that has separation anxiety? Or what about a dog that has problems with strangers? And I think that certainly like the dogs, we enrolled dogs in the program based on like essentially, could I walk you on leash such that, I could collect urine from you and you weren't like completely creeped out by me. And, you don't want to bite me. I mean, those are like, when folks ask like, what are the criteria? I mean, it's pretty at the end of the day, please don't bite me, which like, let's agree on that. And then like, don't be afraid of my pee stick. So it does help us collect try to, really have a big, umbrella of the dogs that are participating in our studies. But I do think that, we have to remember that at the end of the day, this is a sample. Hopefully it's representative, but there's likely going to be individuals, likely on the more fearful side. side that aren't participating. And we do need to like kind of remember that the sample is probably not representative of them, extremely fearful, or quite aggressive. But also there could be dogs that struggle with behavioral issues like separation anxiety that maybe bouncing around from the shelter to a house and back might not be the best, because at the end of the day, these are just averages. And we do have to think, like, kind of going back to, what you all stress is that we have to look at the individual in front of us. There's the sort of what works for most. That's a great starting point. But then we have to address like our individual in front of us and what their needs are. So,
and Bernice, maybe you can weigh in on this, knowing this information about how dogs do in outings and how dogs do in field trips. Can shelters then take that information and say, look at the individual dogs and say, like, well, these dogs might be dogs that are probably going to be hanging out of the shelter longer. Maybe they're better suited for outings, and maybe the dogs that are going to be out quicker, or I think I mixed that up, but do you know what I'm saying? Like, some dogs, if they're going to be in the shelter for longer, should do the outings. Yeah. And dogs that are going to go home quicker should do the field trips.
Oh, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree that there might be some really lovely dogs that, outing, they're solid dogs, going out on a field trip is no big deal to them, and I think that, those are the dogs that are like working for the goodness of dogs. You know what I mean? They're going out and doing the good work, right? And spreading the word about, maybe it's them, but it's maybe bringing folks back to the shelter to be able to meet other dogs. And so I do think that we have to kind of consider that. And I think certainly for, so in our study on field trips and sleepovers, one of the things we looked at is programmatic success. What makes a program successful? And so we can kind of, how do you measure that? First off, like, it's sort of nebulous, like, what is program success? So we were like, okay, well, the shelters that were enrolled in our study, we said that they had to complete 40 of whatever, whether it's field trips or sleepovers, do 40 of those. So we said, well, how long did it take you to do that? Thinking that a shelter that was better performing would get it done more quickly. How many caregivers were engaged? We wanted to, with, again, the idea being that if you have a more robust program, you are going to have more individuals participating in it. And then how many of these field trips or sleepovers were you able to complete? Like, total, because you could take dogs more than once. And what we found is that when shelters had a public component to their program, being somebody from the community could just come right in and take a dog out on an outing, those programs were more successful. And so,
fabulous.
Yeah, that was
things that scare everybody, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that was like a really, I think, fun finding, because we had, throughout our training, had encouraged shelters to do that. And I think that one of the first things we hear is like, oh my gosh, like our shelter, our dogs can't do that. And you're right. Probably some dogs can't do that with, somebody that just walks in off the street. And I'm not saying that every dog should be available for the public to go, that we don't know what their skill set is or their comfort level or their ability to handle situations. Like, absolutely. But there's likely a handful of like rock star dogs that could handle that sort of situation where they can be able to be successful with somebody that we've maybe trained a little bit, but don't have like a long-term relationship with them. So I think, to me, though, that sort of public component to our field trip programs, like, we've got to figure out a way to have that, because that's how we get new folks coming in. We've also found in our work that when folks, that first time, like, foster caregivers. So this was during the pandemic. First time foster caregivers, especially if you don't have a dog, are like the most likely to adopt. So when we have those folks coming in and they're like, I haven't done this before. I don't have a dog. You're like, oh my gosh, yes, please. Like, what dog could I show you? And so that was one thing. And I think, Nikki, you probably, I talked about this at the Virginia Federation conference, is that likely those sort of foster caregivers that are first time foster caregivers, and they don't have a dog in the house, and you've got these trial adopters who are coming in, they don't have a dog and they're looking for a dog. These are the same folks. They're just coming to us through different mechanisms, and maybe they're not as far in their sort of, adoption journey where they're like realizing that they're ready for a dog. That's okay. Like, we can bring everybody in kind of wherever they're at. But I think really having those opportunities for our community to like participate, help us with our mission, I think is really important.
I love it.
Do you just think about this all of the time? I would be constantly like, what else can we do?
You already do that.
What a fun job you have to be able to like think about these things all the time.
That's very sweet of you. No, I think so too. I remember days in my PhD, again, like I think it's sort of this different thing when you like come back to graduate school and you're older. I started my PhD when I was 35, and everyone else is significantly younger than you. But you come back and you just have purpose. You're like, I want to make the world a better place. Like, what can I do to do that? And yeah, I remember days just like walking down the sidewalk and being like, damn, I get to do this for a living. This is amazing. And I think that sort of, I really try to keep that sort of enthusiasm and sort of just curiosity alive, like no matter like what we're doing, because I think it's pretty awesome privilege to be able to get to do this every day. So
yeah, absolutely. And you're doing a whole bunch of stuff at Virginia Tech now, right? With your students there. You have a couple of different really cool programs. Do you want to talk about them a little bit too, what you're doing there with the two programs?
Sure. So some new research that is being headed up by my graduate student, Grace Phillips. She's taking a look, or we were awarded a grant from PetSmart Charities to look at this idea of hybrid fostering. Essentially, this sort of program, it really marries like years of this like research of doing different types of programs, different fostering programs, and sort of listening to foster caregivers and shelters about what are the benefits of being in the shelter, but also what are the benefits of being in foster care. And so this idea of hybrid fostering is that the dogs will be up for adoption during the day, but then get to go home with a foster caregiver at night. And so because one of the struggles we have in foster caregiving is longer lengths of stay. And we found that, and other studies have found that while it's likely a benefit to the dog's welfare, in terms of their immediate welfare, they are going to probably be in a foster home for longer than they would be in a shelter. And of course, you'd probably be like, also being in a home is probably better than being in a shelter. So it's not that bad, but it does kind of suck up a foster home that could be helping another dog. And so that was sort of some of the impetus behind this idea of hybrid fostering, is that folks get to see them. And we're also like really taking a look at this idea of being able to see these dogs for adoption away from a sheltering environment. So they're in PetSmart, they're in a PetSmart retail location, kind of, again, a different sort of environment or setting for the dogs. And then from our research on sleepovers, we can appreciate that, one night can reduce their stress. So kind of going home with somebody overnight will hopefully help improve their welfare. So that's sort of the idea of that study, is to look at how this type of program, again, same sort of things we're looking at. Immediate welfare, does it reduce dogs' cortisol? How does it influence their activity? And then also taking a look at their sort of adoption likelihood and length of stay as compared to dogs that are just out in traditional foster care, as well as dogs that are just up for adoption at one of the shelter's main sites.
Are the students the ones fostering the dogs, or do you have people from the public fostering the dogs?
Yeah, so so this study we're really excited to work with, again, because we worked with them in the past. It's Fort Worth Animal Care and Control. So thanks, Nia, for working with us again. And so they're launching this program just like they would, any other program. They're recruiting folks from their community, recruiting foster caregivers that have already fostered for them before, other volunteers to take part in this program. So So most of the time when we carry out these studies, because we've collected a lot of pee over the years, so much pee. I could show anyone how to do it at this point. I think very expert level, and I think that most of the time, we're working with the shelter's existing fostering network, and most of the time, what's like pretty neat is that this work is already impactful, and like I think all of us, really, I don't know, really really respect the gravity of our work. And so I think, amazing folks that are doing foster caregiving. And then I think when we come in and we're like, hey, we're doing this study, like that like impacts them like it impacts us, right? Where we're like, wow, like we want to be part of something bigger. And so, most of the time we found that, we get this really great community of foster caregivers helping us carry out these studies. And, we're really lucky for it. So most of the time, although I have to tell you that we throughout our studies on field trips and sleepovers, we usually go and live there for like a month. And because how do you collect all this urine? It's us. That's why. And our sort of army of undergraduates and graduate students. But when it comes to we fostered a few dogs. So that has happened when they haven't gone out at night, and we're like, come on home with us. You can stay overnight with us. But most of the time, it's other folks that are doing it.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, maybe a little bit in the weeds, but like, has it been a struggle to get all of that coordination to get the dogs in and out of, the adoption center?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's always, I think we call them intensive data collections for a reason, you know what I mean? Because sometimes, like I was thinking about the study, this one we're writing up for publication, but so I'm expecting folks will see it later on this year, is on week-long fostering. So that's the fostering of dogs for 1 week in a home, and looking at a 5-day baseline before they went to fostering and another 5 days after. And so you can imagine that, the dogs were in that study for 17 days, which is the longest we have ever tried to pull off. And of course, I think folks are like, well, wait a second, like, what about them being adopted? And of course, like they could be adopted. That's just like kind of one of the things that happen. Most of the time, folks, they would, if they had a potential adopter, those are the folks that were fostering them. So we did try to do a lot of things in that study to make sure that dogs weren't sticking around any longer than they had to. That was a lot of coordination, let me tell you, because we would do 5 days of urine collection and activity monitoring, and the dogs would go out for a week. So you can imagine that we did not want to lose any of the dogs after we had 5 days of data on them. So, oh my gosh, we were like doing all these dog meetups, like, let's have your dog, like meet this dog. Let's make sure they get along, because we really we wanted folks to have a good time, because like our kind of like biggest fear was that the dogs would be returned because they didn't get along with somebody. But, we did a lot of matchmaking and a lot of really listening to people and what they needed, and then a lot of support. And we were successful, and we were able to get between our two sites about 80 dogs in that study.
And that's coming out. Do you know when that'll be released? Or
yeah, if I get my butt in gear, hopefully we'll have it submitted this summer, and then we'll be seeing it probably sometime in the fall or early winter.
Cool. And then you have a shelter training program too.
Yes.
You're just doing everything. I feel so inadequate.
No, it's okay. I have to say that like all of this stuff happens because I am just, I'm like one, just one very small person, and all of this work happens in collaboration with a lot of really amazing people. My colleague at Virginia Tech, Erica Fierbacher, we like I said, she was at the start of our fostering research and has been a part of all of these studies, and was part of the grant that we received from Maddie's fund to be able to do, like I said, the years of work that we've been doing. And so we're now partners in crime here at Virginia Tech. And so this past spring, we instructed a shelter dog training class. So that was the first time that our School of Animal Sciences had dogs on campus. the school previously, like for companion animal classes, would go to shelters, which we still do, go to shelters and work with shelter dogs, which is awesome. We have a local shelter in Montgomery County that's nearby. We even for part of that course, we went to the shelter and trained the dogs. But for this course, we decided, well, what if we kept dogs here? And what if after 4 weeks we adopted them out? So that was the sort of setup of the study. We had like over 45 students in the course. And at any one time, we had about 7 or 8 dogs. And so the students worked with them. So we had 3 different lab sections. During lab sections, lab folks would work with their partner, training their dog. And it was essentially like a reactive dog class, right? We're teaching them all the things you need to know to like have nice interactions on leash. And then they were doing in-kennel enrichment and training. But they would work with the dogs for 4 weeks. They would come in. They had about 5 different activities every week that they did with their dog. So they had to come in outside of class and walk their dog or train their dog or do an interaction. And then once a week, they had a 2-hour lecture with us. And we were either talking about sheltering, shelter dog welfare, training, adoption. And so they would use that information to help inform their training. And then we would hold adoption events that the students would work together in all their groups, because about 6 students were assigned to each dog, and they would support their dogs at these adoption events and talk to potential adopters and come to meet and greets. And we were able to place, we're at this point, I think we're almost at about 20 dogs that we placed during the semester.
Wow, this has to be like the students' favorite class.
I know. I think all of us that like were like, man, if there was a class like this when I was in school, I think it was really sweet. We got a lot of really great feedback. It was the first time we were offering it, so I mean, I think I'm super appreciative of their patience, because I think we were, trying to, we were figuring it out as we went along. Yeah. Yep. And certainly, like, teaching 45 students plus running a rescue was a lot. I'm not gonna lie, but I also think we had a wonderful undergraduate, Natalie, who was our adoption coordinator, and she was just a rock star. And I was looking at our adoption applications, and we had over completed applications, I think probably over 100 applications throughout the semester that we had to review and set up meet and greets. And so grateful for that. And just the students who were so invested in their dogs and really wanting them to succeed, both in the training, which was really exciting to see. But also, they were invested in their outcome, and we met this, because they would get points, which was just so great for the class. They would get points for talking to folks during these adoption events, and so they were like, oh, this person is awesome. This person's going to submit an application, and we really like them, and here's why, and we had all the stuff though talking about, while we're big fans of matchmaking and dogs, meeting other dogs. And really having the family involved, not from a barrier way, but from an inclusive way of this is a big decision. Here we are, I'm a certified applied animal behaviorist, so is Dr. Feuerbach. We have all these folks that have been spending so much time with these dogs. We don't know everything, but let us at least share with you what we've seen to help you in this really big decision. And then we would have all the dogs went out into trial adoption so that folks could really test drive it. And if it didn't work for them, no big deal, bring the dogs back. And so I think that was another really fun piece of the class, is just the students being able to talk to potential adopters, share their stories about the dogs, but then also really creating a sort of non-judgmental place about how we place dogs, and really trying to understand what people are looking for and helping them on a kind of customer service level versus a judgment level. I don't know if that makes sense, but that was really what we tried to instill in them, and helping people find what they were looking for. So
That's great. If we all could just have a bunch of undergrads helping us adopt our
Yes,
dogs out.
yes. We'll take some.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that that was one of the things that you had mentioned is like where do we see this type of work going? And honestly, we see this as just like a first step in hopefully having a succession of hopefully maybe like 3 classes where we get to do an advanced level class where we get to have the dogs playing with each other and really start having the students addressing behavioral issues, low to moderate, like nothing like super severe, but at least, and I think the way that we've set up this program, and it comes from such an applied behavior analysis approach, that we're already giving them the tools to solve problems, but I think more explicitly doing that. And then also, of course, bringing cats into the mix because I love cats. And so, that's been a part of my research program that I haven't been able to, really been able to develop yet. So but ultimately, like this work to me is about workforce development. And like when you all said, having undergrads at your places, I mean, that's honestly like my dream is that folks don't have to like have this undergraduate degree and then decide they want to get into animal sheltering and aren't prepared for it. Why not prepare them during their undergraduate degree and really create this workforce that we need in sheltering because it's a high stress environment where like, animals are in need, people are in need. And I think that we really need to prepare those that are going to be working in our field with the knowledge and experience and foundation to be able to succeed. So that's what I'm hoping. I hope that we get to do more of these classes and really, again, think about students being able to learn these skills and being able to be placed in internships and things like that after so that we can, really transform animal sheltering and really have it, really see it for like the vocation and calling and like expertise that's needed in it. I think really acknowledging that because I think we all know that it can be a pretty challenging environment to be successful and stay within, but yeah, I think we all know how important it is, though.
Yeah, very well said.
That's very sweet. Thanks.
Yeah. I wanted to see if you could even talk. I was on your website and I saw your call for the post-adoption outcomes. I know it must be something that you're working on or plan to work on. So I was wondering, could you give us a little insight onto like what's that?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yes, it was so funny. It's funny because I also got a little note from Janice being like, "Oh my gosh, this sounds great! Can't wait to see how you answer this question." And I'm like, "Me too." Stay tuned. Again, this type of work is again such a collaborative effort, and I was brought in late to this. Like, I'm just glad that they're letting me play in the sandbox. Truly, like I'm like, thank you. So this is a collaboration between North Carolina State University, Sarah Bennett's there in the vet school, and then also Jacqueline Ellis and Linda Jacobson at Toronto Humane Society, and Lynn Eckert is also at North Carolina. I have to like give a shout out to Lynn because she works so damn hard on this project. And so the idea of this study is really trying to understand more about the behavior of dogs in the shelter, particularly around biting, just to be really explicit and trying to understand how that's related to their behavior post-adoption. And I know it's like this sort of, in some ways it's sort of controversial, I guess, but in some ways, like gathering evidence is not. And so that's sort of, I think, the spot we're in is that so many shelters are like uncertain about how to navigate having a dog that has bitten in care, and how do we place those dogs, and what does that mean for their future behavior, as well as the welfare of the owner and their satisfaction with the pet. I think that, there's definitely ideas around that. And so I think that that's sort of really the impetus for the study, is really trying to understand this experience looking at dogs that don't have bite histories versus those that do. And do we see differences in their behavior post-adoption? Are owners satisfied with them, differently? Is the welfare of the owner different? And so that's what we're hoping to answer. And I think we've gotten a good response from shelters that want to help us answer this question. And so I'm excited to be a part of a team that's trying to answer that, so that hopefully we can derive some ideas around how to address these situations in sheltering. Because I think, like our Canine Science Symposium, so that's a symposium that we put on every year, and so that I just survived. So we had a colleague, Laura Samet from Dogs Trust, and I love how they call dogs that are behaviorally challenged, they call them tricky dogs. I love that, tricky. And she was talking about the increase of seeing kind of these tricky dogs in the sheltering system. And I think we've also experienced that here too in the US. And so this sort of, if in fact dogs do have, more needs in our sheltering system, it's likely that we're going to be seeing more dogs that have more complex histories. And so I think figuring out how we can better understand what they might be like after adoption can help us better support the dogs, help us better support shelters that are placing dogs with bite histories. Because again, I don't think it's an issue that's going to go away anytime soon. That's that.
Yeah, there's not any real research done on this topic, right?
Yeah.
I'm aware of. Like, nobody's doing this,
no.
right?
I know. I think that was probably another Janice's thing. She was like, "Yeah, how do you?" And I don't know the answer to that. I think with regards to we don't kind of know what we're going to find. We might find that the methods that we're using fall short. I think it's sort of a first attempt to try to understand the phenomenon. Hopefully, this is the whole thing with research, right? Is that to me, like, the sort of greatest compliment in research is when somebody is like, I want to see if that is happening where I'm at. So what I hope is that, we have a handful of studies and shelters in the study. But then, if other folks are interested in this question, they can also kind of investigate it as well. So we can try to understand these tricky dogs that are in our care and better support them.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I know.
Yeah, no, I'm staying tuned. Is there anything else you have going on that you want to talk about or shout out, or anything we missed? Or
I know. I'm trying to think.
We're just a little late on the canine synopsis. But how that went well?
Oh, the Canine Science Symposium? Yeah.
Symposium,
yeah, it's great.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So that is a conference that I've been putting on since 2013. And so we've had it in San Francisco every year. And again, it's sort of the idea of that conference. I think it's fairly sort of like singular, and like its niche is that it is applied canine science. So it is sort of science you can use. And the presentations are given by the scientists that are carrying out the work. And the sort of goal of the conference is really to really disseminate this information amongst practitioners. So yes, scientists do come because, of course, scientists love fellow scientists, or there's some that they like, I guess. And so we love hanging out with each other. And that's like where, like, you often see this sort of same speakers each year, or several of the same speakers each year. And that is because we're all former Clive Wynne students, and we all just love getting together with each other. And so that's really fun each year to be able to see each other and like learn what everyone is up to, which is all often like so much. And so you're just like blown away. But yeah, the real idea is that while there might be some scientists that come, obviously everyone is welcome, but really it's like to share this type of evidence, this evidence with folks in animal sheltering, trainers, consultants, folks that can really just take it and use it. That was sort of the whole, I don't know, sort of why it started, was to really bridge this gap between the science and the practice. And I think what better way than the folks that are actually doing the work. I think that oftentimes, like, science communication, just like any other type of communication. Sometimes it can be lost in translation. And so I think that it's a fun way to be able to have that type of hello kitten, that type of the type of knowledge sharing. So plus, oh my gosh, it's so fun. There's so much. I love doing it every year because the audience is like so incredibly engaged. They have the best questions, and it's just like you want to share what you're up to. So
that's great and so important. I think it's so important to try to get all of that information. I've read some really academic studies and I have to read them over and over and over again before they like all the information sinks in. So it's really nice to have
sometimes
people out
we go,
there.
Janice, what does this actually say? Janice, break this
most
down.
of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would ask Janice that too. Yeah, I agree. And I think that that's sort of like, in my opinion, like that's sort of the nature of our science, is that because it is so applied, because we work with like such a, like, I don't know, charismatic, species. I think dogs are just, they're dogs and everyone's interested, that like we do, in my opinion, kind of have a duty that we do need to make our science accessible, especially if it is something that can change the lives of dogs, for the better. We need to make sure we kind of that it's able to be disseminated out of academia and folks that can use it, whether it's owners, whether it's sheltering folks, behavior practice, whoever can be using it. So
all right, I don't want to take up any of your time, even though I want to say a million other things.
Well, we'll have her again.
Yes. Okay.
And again. Right?
Thank you. That's so nice. I appreciate it.
But I appreciate you so much. Thank you for taking the time to chat with us today.
For all the stuff you do for shelter dogs.
Yes, it's huge.
Yeah, thanks so much, you two. It was really fun having being on the podcast, and I was so excited when you were like, "Hey, do you want to be on?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, that sounds great." So thanks for thinking of me. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
I'm glad the kitty joined us.
Oh, I know. Is it Cosima's just being adorable right now? So yeah.